It is 10 o'clock, but it is my custom to start these meetings at 10:05 just to give people a chance to get through security and all of that. But I'm letting everyone know by my watch it's 10:01, and now 10:02. We'll be starting in 3. If I can ask all of the members of either the Broward County or Palm Beach County water advisory boards to please be seated at the table. And we'll be starting in the next roughly 30 seconds. I know that people coming from Palm Beach, actually, I'll be starting when Dr. Gerardo gets back because I don't want to do anything without having Dr. Hirado here. So strike that. We'll be starting as soon as she gets back. Should be momentarily. Let's see. No, no, okay, water. Okay, let me quote. Let me, no, there's just one page that had the map, but don't worry, I'll find it later. Nope. I'll find it later. I'll show it to you. Don't worry about it. Okay, thank you. Who is it? Okay. Chip Block, are you on remotely? Okay. In the absence of Chair Block, who will be chairing this on behalf of Palm Beach?
We don't, do we have Megan Houston? I mean,
Miss Houston, are you online? I see your name on there.
so do we, who's the Palm Beach staff?
Good morning, I'm online.
Okay, thank you, Megan. Will you be, do you know who, in the absence of Chair Block, who would be chairing this on behalf of Palm Beach?
Let me see, is Paul Linton there by chance?
I'm vice chair. It's Rochelle.
Okay, well, Rochelle, until Rochelle lit until the presence of the chair, I guess you'll be chairing on behalf of Palm Beach. So,
Okay.
okay. All right, I would like to call this meeting, a joint meeting of the Broward County Water Advisory Board and the Palm Beach County Water Resources Task Force to order. And I will ask Greg Mount to call the roll for the Water Advisory Board members. Again, let me caution people or advise people that these meetings are being recorded in full. They will be available on the Broward County website. I don't know if Palm Beach will also have this on the Palm Beach website, but certainly it will be available to Palm Beach. So as you make your comments, remember that they are all being recorded for posterity. So, Mr. Mount, if you will call the roll, please.
Thank you, sir. Senator Steve Geller.
Here.
Vice Mayor Sandra Welch.
Here.
Commissioner Andrea McGee. Commissioner Doug Bell.
Here.
Commissioner Denise Grant. Commissioner Kevin Biederman. Commissioner Mary Molina McPhee. Commissioner Nancy Mateer.
Here, it's Commissioner Nancy Mateer Bowen. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Rhonda Eaton.
Present.
Commissioner Tim Ryan. Commissioner Tom Good.
I'm present.
Councilmember Jim Albritton.
Present.
Councilmember Susan Starkey.
Here's
via Zoom.
Jean Goldman. Governing Board Member Ron Bergeron. Kevin Hart.
Present.
Mark Peterson. Mayor Greg Ross. Mayor Michelle Gomez. Mayor Anthony Caggiano.
I see Mayor Gomez present.
Yeah, I saw her. I don't think she can unmute.
Sorry, I unmuted a little too late, but good morning.
Good morning, Mayor. Mayor Anthony Caggiano.
Present.
Thank you. Mayor Aisha Gordon.
Here.
We have a quorum,
I'm
Senator.
here.
Thank you. Can I ask you, that is of the Water Advisory Board, are we calling the roll for the TAC? Okay. Please call the roll for the Broward County Technical Advisory Committee.
Okay.
Kevin Hart.
Here, present.
Randy Brown. Albert Carbon. Alan Garcia.
Kevin Carter for Alan Garcia.
Brett Butler. Commissioner Doug Bell.
Here.
David Walker. Dawn Tietzel. Giovanni Battista.
Present.
Heather Caniff. Isabel Cosio Carballo. Jace Selby.
Here.
Jeff Jang. Dr. Gerardo.
Here.
Jose Lopez.
Present.
Lisa Milenkovic. Mike Bailey. Patrick Davis.
Janine Wickerfee here, alternate for Pat Davis.
Thank you. Pete Kwiatkowski.
Here.
Raphael Frias. Renuka Muhammad.
Present.
Stephanie Pearson.
Here.
Steve Holmes. Suzanne Meckler. Talal Abi Karam. Tim Welch.
Sangeeta Tulashia for Tim Welch.
Thank you. We have a quorum of the TAC.
Thank you. And okay. Again, if anyone is here from the Palm Beach Water Task Force, I believe it is, he took my
It's up there.
name, please be sitting at the head table. So,
Do we have
Mayor
Mayor Greg
Weiss, right.
Weiss? Greg was supposed to be there in person.
thank you. Okay, and I see that Mayor Weiss is here. Again, if there are any other members from the Water Resources Task Force from Palm Beach, please come to the head table. And we'll, who again, Mayor, are you mayor again? Yes. Okay, Mayor, I understand how that works. Okay, so who will be chairing this on behalf of Palm Beach? Will that be Rachel Litt or Mayor Weiss?
I defer to Mayor Weiss at this point since he is there in person.
Okay, in that case, Mayor Weiss, can you call the roll for the Water Resource Task Force? And if you don't have a copy of the membership, it's right there. Okay.
All right. Monica Mayo. Robert Shore. Chip Block. Dee Dee Halpern. Karen Lithgow. I'm here. Poonam Calcott.
I'm here for Poonam Kalkat.
Who's that's Julie? Okay,
Yes, I'm the alternate.
thank you. Tommy Stroud,
I'm here.
thank you. Jay Steinley,
Mark Elsner, alternate for Jay Steinley.
okay. Rochelle Litt
I'm here.
and Michael Johnson. All right, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 members.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning. I'd like to welcome everybody here to the 2023 joint meeting of the Broward County Water Advisory Board and the Palm Beach County Water Resources Task Force. As chair of the Broward County Water Advisory Board, it's a pleasure to be here today with colleagues, leadership, and stakeholders from Broward and Palm Beach communities who share interest and commitment to the resilience and sustainable management, development, and protection of our water resources for the environment, our communities, and the economy. As I will be making a presentation in a few minutes, I think we all know water is probably the biggest issue facing South Florida. I mean, affordable housing is an issue, economy is an issue, but water is probably the single biggest one. Sometimes we have too much, sometimes we have not enough, and when we have the right amount, we need to make sure it stays potable drinking water. I recognize that we had all hoped to reconvene together sooner than this, but it's been a full 2 years since our last meeting. However, the timing and theme of today's meeting, Commissioner Ryan?
Morning, Senator.
How are you? Could not be more critical. You may recall when we met jointly, the two boards together, we had only just achieved authorization of the CNF resiliency restudy after several years of regional advocacy. This was in fiscal year 22 when Colonel Kelly was still serving as colonel for the Jacksonville district. Today we have the pleasure of Colonel Booth, and I did want to recognize our two distinguished guests, Colonel Booth and SFWMD board member Ron Bergeron, and engagement in the conversation. With significant program advancements, we're at a crossroads here, and again, my initial remarks after I make remarks and after Chair Weiss makes remarks will be about where we are on the for the first presentation on the absolute danger that we are in over the fact that, well, we're going to be underwater pretty soon, but I'll get to that. So I hope that today will be a memorable day as we recall the significant progress underway to advance the resilience of our region and communities, while also receiving a report from the Army Corps as to where we are on some of these projects. I challenge everybody to concentrate on this issue. Again, I can't think of anything more important. We have great opportunities to work with our state and federal partners. We share a significant track record of success. We cannot do this on our two-county level without working with the state of Florida, with the South Florida Water Management District, with the Army Corps, with Congress. We cannot do this ourselves. This must be done in a multi-jurisdictional basis. For those listening today here and online, listen carefully, but remember, it's being taped, so if you hear things that are a little complex, you can go back and watch the video. And again, I normally try and gear my presentations to, they keep telling Dr. Hirado, 5th, 6th grade audience, and so everybody can understand, and that's why we have lots of pretty pictures and charts. Today, as it relates to the CNF resilience study, resilience issues are complex. You can't make them that simple. It's complicated hydrology, but we gotta understand it. And it's much larger than the geography of any of our communities. I'm hoping that we can be animated and engaged. I'm confident that the task force and the Water Advisory Board together will recognize these issues as opportunities, and I would like to thank the presenters here today, as well as the members, stakeholders, and staff who have helped with our prior efforts. Again, I know Broward can't do this alone. We need Dade, we need Palm Beach. This has to be regional, as well as as well as the other levels of government. So at this point, I'd like to ask Mayor Weiss if he has any opening remarks on behalf of the Broward County Water Resources Task Force. Palm Beach, I'm sorry. Sorry, reflex.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to recognize South Florida Water Management Executive Director Drew Bartlett.
Of course. And Drew,
that's
would you
here.
mind joining us up here?
Yeah.
Okay. You would mind joining us up here? I understand. Okay.
How do you answer that question? No? Say yes.
Yes.
Would you?
And Colonel, could I invite you up here as well? And we should have enough seats. Yes. Okay. All right. And Mr. Mayor, you're recognized, sir. Actually, you're co-chairing it, so.
Okay, thank you. I just, first off, just want to bring greetings from Palm Beach County. It's wonderful to be here and to have this assembly of Broward County Water Advisory Board and the Palm Beach County Water Resources Task Force together once again. Water is the lifeblood of our communities. It's our shared responsibility, and today we unite for its future, a future that demands collaboration, resilience, and sustainability. In the face of climate change, we have no alternative but to unite to protect this indispensable resource. This isn't about us or our counties. It's about the lives and the futures of the people we serve. Each drop of water we save, each reservoir we protect, is a testament to our commitment to their future. And together we have the power to create a legacy of resilience. Our collaboration can and will ensure the sustainability of our water resources. And I'm confident that together we'll make waves. So it's delighted to be here, and look forward to hearing from our speakers today, but more importantly, working together to our collective future. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe the next item is, or remarks that I will be making as an introduction to the Central and South Florida system. And Greg, if I can ask you to pull that up. Let me say that, and I think the Army Corps and the South Florida Water Management District and most other people have heard me running around and yelling about this topic for the last 4 or 5 years. And I have to tell you, sometimes Chicken Little is correct. And the sky is not falling, but the water is rising. It is unfortunate, but it is a fact that South Florida, Southeast Florida, is basically carved out of the Everglades. We all know that. And it was done through an amazing project, which were the canals that were built in the 1940s and 50s by the Army Corps. And this was just, that's how we drain. We drain because we are, if anybody has seen our climate, there's a difference in weather and climate. We all know that. Our climate, starting in about the middle of Palm Beach through Broward and Dade, is all either subtropical rainforest or subtropical monsoon. That is the official climate map. And I was looking for that. I don't have it with me, but I will have it at within 20 minutes of this meeting being over, so we can send that to you. So you can see, not making it up, our climate here is subtropical rainforest and subtropical monsoon. What that means is it rains a lot. And the reason we're not normally underwater is because of the brilliant work with the drainage canals, which unfortunately are not going to be draining very much longer. So it is my prediction, unfortunately, as I've been saying, South Florida, Southeast Florida was carved out of the Everglades, and is about to return to the Everglades. Greg, next slide, please. This is just the simplest map that you can see on this. You can see you have the Everglades to the west. On the blue, that thing that says ocean is the ocean. And in between them, you've got that long line, the primary canal. And these are the things that drain us so that we're not underwater when it rains, unless you were in Broward County a couple weeks ago. We have storage, typically through the canals, and you'll see this on the next slide. The blue canals that you see are the main primary canals. The green are the secondary and local canals. So when it rains, water collects in the local green canals and then flows into the blue canals. The blue canals head out from here to the ocean. Next slide, please. We're already having problems with saltwater intrusion, and as you see, it's getting worse. If you look from 94 to 2009, that 15-year period, saltwater intrusion intruded by 6 more square miles. If you look at the last 10 years only versus the 15 before that, it increased by 12 square miles. So we're having problems because of rising ocean levels with greater saltwater intrusion. Next slide, please. I mentioned these canals. These canals are gravity driven. Water flows downhill. That's great. Water does not flow uphill on its own, and that's our problem. As you see, it's a gravity driven structure. Those barriers are called salinity control barriers. And if anybody wants to guess what a salinity control barrier does, it keeps out the salinity, keeps out the salt water. And it's, as you see, gravity driven discharge. But today, because of sea level rise, we're already starting to have problems where they're being overtopped. Next slide, please. Okay, well, what's changed? Why is this happening? Well, remember, when this was built, the inland water, 1947 design condition, our inland water was here, and our ocean water was here. Now, not technically, this is not to scale, but you get the idea. Water flows downhill. And that was fine as long as the headwater, the inland water, is here and the ocean water is here. You know what's been happening over the past number of years? My right hand has been growing. The tailwater sea level rise has been going, and this chart shows it, better than I can tell you. You look, sea level rise has increased. Next slide, please. Again, this is what I've said. And by the way, most people think that you lower the barrier so that the water can flow. You actually raise the barrier when you're trying to get the fresh water out to the ocean. You raise the barrier and water flows underneath because increased water pressure. But by the way, you only get that increased water pressure if the tailwater is higher than the headwater is higher than the tailwater. So this is just a very simple, we see higher headwater, lower tailwater, raise the salinity control barrier, water drains, South Florida stays dry, everything is good. Next slide, please. But as sea level is rising, there are times now where the tailwater, the ocean water, is higher than the inland water. That would cause a reverse flow. Reverse flow is bad if the salt water gets into our freshwater canals. All sorts. I mean, it will affect our drinking water. It will affect all of the agriculture, everything that we're growing. And by the way, it will flood us. These are flood control, and flood control doesn't work if it's still causing flooding. So you can see, we can shut the gate or raise the gate to prevent the tailwater. But that's going to, in many cases, we would have to raise the inland water level to maintain the flow out to the tailwater, and that means it's going to flow over the banks of the canals. And you can see right now, if you look at the pictures on my right, the one with the little, let's see, yes, it's on the right. When it was designed, which is the top slide, there's a lot of space between the water level, and the bank for us to store flood water when it's raining. If you look at the bottom, even though it's still not quite at the level of the banks and we can still hopefully flow, we've lost much of our storage capacity already. Next slide, please. As I said, Broward sits in a subtropical climate. And again, not just subtropical rainforest or subtropical monsoon. There's, by the coast, there's a small part that's subtropical savanna, which still rains a lot, although not as bad as subtropical rainforest or monsoon. Just the word monsoon should give you an idea it rains a lot. Our rainfall is not actually worsening, but it is. We're still averaging 58 inches a year, which is what we have been averaging. But now we have periods of greater time where it doesn't rain at all. And then when it does rain, it's more intense rain, as in causing flooding, as we saw here not long ago in Broward. So if you look at the next slide, please. This is the way it's supposed to work. You know, we have the nice car, actually, I think it's a van. The van, the home, the car, the catch basin, the salinity control structure. You've got the ocean outfall. You have some nice little rain clouds. Everybody stays high and dry. However, next slide, please. Now, with reduced storage, as I showed you in the earlier slide, increased rainfall, and ocean level rise, our system backs up with widespread flooding. And I think I may have missed, no, maybe the next slide. Yeah, okay. So this is the problem. If I can see the next slide, please. Yeah, sea level rise is accelerating as well. Thank you. Sea level rise is accelerating also. And as you see, 5 inches, it's been averaging the last 23 years, about 1 inch every 3 to 4.25 years. But if you look at what it's been doing more recently, it's increasing. The last 3 years, it's 1 inch every 3 to 4.25. If you look from 1992 to 2015, was 1 inch for every 7.5. 1900, 2000 is 1 inch every 11 years. We have more rain, sea level rise, and that's bad. Next slide, please. This is my scary slide. The other stuff wasn't the scary stuff. This slide is the scary stuff. We warned in 2009 that based on each of these, and by the way, we're not talking now about the NOAA extreme. We're not talking about the NOAA high. We're not even talking about the NOAA intermediate high, but just at the IPC median, correct? Okay, we are focusing on NOAA intermediate. Sorry. Looking at, oh yeah, that's the darkest line. Looking at the darkest line, the NOAA intermediate high, we are expecting that we gave warning in 2009 that we were expecting we would be unable to drain. And the best prediction that we have, and this is only a prediction, is that in roughly 2034, which is roughly 11 years from now, on a normal daily, correct me if I'm wrong, because I may be, on a normal daily high tide, we will be unable to drain. Now, I say 11 years, could be 8 years, could be 15 years. We don't know. We're guessing as to what the sea level rise will be. But under these charts, it's give or take 11 years. 11 years means that when it rains, and did I mention that we're subtropical monsoon? I think I did. It's going to be raining, and when it rains, we are not going to be able to drain. Meaning, what I said earlier, that we were carved out of the Everglades and will be returning to the Everglades. And by the way, this is not a problem. There are some problems we just don't know how to fix that are so, I mean, the whole issue of sea level rise is something that I'm not sure we know how to fix. This one is fixable, but we need a lot more money than we have now. What we need to do is we need roughly 18 million or 17 million for the pre-study? 19. Okay. Okay, we need $19 million, and I believe of that we have 3 for the 216 study, which is not a study that was done in 216. That's just federal jargon. It took me a while to figure that one out. And I still don't know, except she keeps calling it a 216 study, so I said, okay. And we need the study. And then Colonel Kelly told me, I think it was 5 years ago, that with the study, that 4 or 5 years ago, if the Army Corps had all the money that they needed, if they got the appropriations they needed when they needed it, and nothing went wrong, and everything went the way they were hoping, their best case scenario was they could complete these repairs in 15 years. I was told in the last couple of months, because the Army Corps is very consistent, that if they got all the money they need, which they don't have, if they got all the authorizations they need, which they also don't have, well, they have the authorization but not the money to do any of it. If they don't run into any problems, it'll be 15 years. So they're consistent. I was told 4 years ago it'll be 15 years. I was told a couple months ago it'll be 15 years. I'm fairly confident in 2 or 3 years from now, they will tell me it will be 15 years unless they get the money they need. I'm not blaming the Corps. You've told us you need money that you haven't received. I understand that. But we need to make sure, and that's actually my last slide, so I'll get to that in a moment, which is yelling. We're going to be underwater. When it rains and we can't drain, what happened in Broward County a couple of weeks ago will no longer be an exception. It will be the norm because we will be unable to drain. And the way that we need to fix this, we know is, and they'll tell you that in a minute, they need pumps. Oh, hold on, actually, I think that's the next slide, please. Okay, so you see that pump? We need big, giant Hawker pumps. That's a technical, actually, I believe that's the trademark of the company. We need these big pumps to pump the water, which will help, but that's not really enough at all, because if you remember, you have the little canals going into the big canal. You have to have the little canals able to get into the big canals. And if you fill the big canals too much, which are already near the level of the banks, you're going to have to either dig lower or raise the banks, because one way or another, you need more capacity in the canals to handle what you're pumping into it. So we're going to need the pumps. We're going to need either berms or seawalls or banks on the canals. We're going to need pumps on the little canals to pump over the berms into the big canals. I mean, I don't know how to do this, but we know generally, he does, generally how to do it, but we need the studies. But it's complicated stuff, which is why we need the studies. So we know generally how to fix it, but we've been unable to do so right now. Next slide, please. The 216 resilience study is on, well, actually, I don't think it's underway. We'll hear about that because I'm told that they can't really start it until they get their, the money that they need. The comprehensive study is authorized, but it's not funded. We were told, I was told by Colonel Kelly about 4 or 5 years ago that at the time the pumps were supposed to be $3 or $4 billion. Now, that was years ago, and that doesn't include the little canals, doesn't include, it's a lot of money. And the Army Corps is trying to deal, and federal government, environmental, they're trying to deal with getting more water in the on the Colorado River. They're trying to deal with the Northeast. We're one area of many, but did I mention we're going to be underwater? So here is my mission to everybody. Ron, you know everybody. You need to get the congressional delegation, but not just him. We need to get our congressional delegation, our U.S. senators. We need to make them understand that Southeast Florida, as we know it, will not exist in another 20 years. And this is not something that you can put the money in next year and say, great, they can fix it in a year. This, if we had done this 10 years ago, we could have avoided the catastrophe. It is too late to do that. We are going to be underwater, I believe. But hopefully we can limit the number of years and the depth of water that we're going to be under. And I'm going to close with 2 things. Number one, wherever you live in Broward, and by the way, it's not just West Broward, it's East Broward. Sometimes East Broward could be worse because when the water goes down the canals from West Broward, it goes into the rivers and the canals in East Broward. So, number one, wherever you live, do not leave your pets out at night because the alligators will eat them. And secondly, final slide, my investment advice is invest in companies that build arks and houseboats because there's going to be a real push on them here in Southeast Florida, Palm Beach, Dade, Broward counties. So I hope I have scared all of you. And with my cheerful remarks and predictions, I would now like to call for rebuttal. Colonel Booth, welcome. I hate to throw you into the firing line. As you can tell, I'm passionate on this, and I've been doing this for years. And sometimes, you rage against the machine. I think that's an album somebody wrote, I don't know who. But I've been doing everything I can, but it seems like it's been for naught. Help us.
Sure. Well, Senator Geller, thank you so much. I do want to start off with the Army Corps of Engineers is hiring, and with your demonstrated engineering skill set that you just took us through, I got a job for you.
You couldn't afford me.
If you want to wade into the engineering, terrific presentation. I really appreciate it. To Senator, Commissioners, Mayors, let's see if I get all these right. Board members, committee members, or task force members. I think I've covered everybody that may be dialed in. Thanks for having me here today to speak. I am Colonel Jamie Booth, Jacksonville District Commander. I've been in command of Jacksonville District for a little over a year and a half now. We'll have a little over a year in command until my replacement comes in. It's a great honor to be in charge of about 1,100 of Department of Army's best civilians and a handful of military officers. I do want to point out, kind of addressing some of Senator Geller's comments, that 1,100 are Puerto Ricans and they're Floridians. We live here. We go to soccer with you, we go to church with you, and we experience the conditions that you described, and are absolutely committed to working to get these resolved. So, real quick, the Corps of Engineers of Jacksonville District is not just the central and southern Florida system. We cover all of Florida, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. I'll be talking about our operations with navigation, flood risk management, coastal storm risk management, and aquatic ecosystem restoration today. But on top of that, we are also out doing regulatory permitting, military construction in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, and emergency management response operations once, if and when the disasters do come into the area. And so we've been doing that since the 1880s, and we've been a part of the community since that time frame for the Jacksonville district. As I described, with all those functions, the organization does resiliency. Before, resiliency was a big term, right? Be it, risk management, whatever you wanted to call it before. The Army Corps of Engineers has been involved in this process since its formation at the earliest portions of our country. And so let's talk about how the Corps sees resiliency in South Florida. I think a lot of people will have some variation of this chart. But if you kind of look from the coast working inland, we see multiple lines of defense, and this is more of a kind of a concept sketch. If you look at that segment on the right-hand side at the coastal areas, we have a function called Coastal Storm Risk Management. You'll see that acronym there, CSRM. And so think storm surge or protections against storm surge, wave attack, and sea level rise. And I simply put that as, you think of it as beach nourishment, putting sand on the beach, increasing dunes, that type of work. As you work more inland, the Corps has been getting involved in what we call back bay coastal storm risk management studies. So think Miami-Dade Back Bay, and looking at how do we protect the backside of the barrier islands or the bayfronts against that same storm surge, sea level rise. We go into that 216 study that you see there in that banner, the Central and Southern Florida 216 or flood resiliency study. The 216 for everybody, that's section 216 of some congressional act back in the 70s, I believe, that allowed us to look at change conditions in an existing project. So when we throw numbers out there, typically that's just a paragraph number that comes from a congressional authorization. But that is looking right now, particularly at increased rainfall, sea level rise, and the impacts on the urbanization in the area since the system was built. And then we continue to talk about that comprehensive Everglades ecosystem restoration restudy and that's aquatic ecosystem restoration, or AER. Excuse me, I take it back. Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan passed in 2000. That is our aquatic ecosystem restoration work that we are really getting after significantly with Drew's team and the South Florida Water Management District. But looking at how do you do water storage, it's that timing, distribution, quantity, quality of water in the Everglades, getting it right. But ecosystem restoration is in fact resiliency. You look at the benefits of having a solid ecosystem and functioning more as it had in the past. And so I also want to go and hit on a couple other areas that Senator Geller talked about as far as how does this Corps concept integrate into what's going on throughout multiple levels. And so you go down there to you start of the pyramid, we the people, the individual citizen of the United States, and then we've all got a function in resiliency at the city, the county, the state, and the federal level. And so relationships are keys in that. That's all of us coming together and having discussions like we are today through multiple counties. But ultimately, how do each of our plans integrate into what effectively becomes one combined effort as we look into the long term? And you can just see some of the different various plans that you see. The federal plan of that pyramid there is one of them is the yellow book. It had a yellow cover. That's that central and the ecosystem restoration plan from 2000 as one of them. But many of you will see your own plans kind of shown here because they all combine to get to the effect that Senator Geller was trying to talk about earlier. Next slide. All right, so I'm going to go back out and go back to that federal portion. If you look at the different areas underneath the umbrella, we're trying to look at how does the Army Corps of Engineers integrate multiple different programs that I described, multiple different projects, and see them as holistically and operating on the whole. If you'd go back even 5 years, the way we looked at things was in each of these kind of columns. From the left, you see the Central and Southern Florida operations, Broward County Water Preserve Area, which AER is that Aquatic Ecosystem Restoration, Miami Harbor as a navigation project. We saw those as single projects or single types of programs with a very siloed effort. We get funded by Congress, we get authority by Congress to do that one project. We get funding by Congress or appropriations to do that one project. But what we're clearly recognizing here in South Florida is that all of these, even at the federal level, combine to act as an integrated system. And we're really, with a lot of encouragement from the organizations in this room, trying to change our mentality and look at how do they interact as one whole. And I'll add an additional layer of complexity in that some of these have already been built. They're at different levels throughout the project cycle. Some of them are still in planning. Some of them are in design. Some of them are in construction or have been constructed, right, and then transitioned over to operation and maintenance. So how do we, when we're authorized at a project or program level, funded at a project or program level, try and nest these together in a way that's functional? All right, give me the next slide. And so here's a different way of looking at that hierarchy or that umbrella area, but more, how do you apply that against a map? And so if you look at the orange, that first left hand of the earlier slide, the Coastal Storm Risk Management Project, you see that first line of defense basically running right down the coastline with various coastal storm risk management projects that you all have in multiple counties. Then you look at the navigation projects in this area, that would be Port Everglades and Miami Harbor, and how are those operating? Then the coastal storm risk management back bay studies, particularly now in the Miami back bay, but also getting started with Key Biscayne as well. We've got a couple other areas in here. The central, and now you start to look at the central and southern Florida system. All the blue lines that are on this slide, or the white and red dots that indicate structures, those blue lines are predominantly canals or levees that do all that flood risk management that Senator Geller so eloquently described earlier. And how do we see those all operating together at one point in time? And then not only that, how do we overlay ecosystem restoration studies? If you look at basically the lower portion of this is Biscayne Bay, BBC or Biscayne Bay Southeastern Everglades Ecosystem Restoration. Did I get it? Ava's happy with me now. That's the only time I'll probably get it right publicly. But then also overlaid, this whole area is effectively where we're looking at that 216 resiliency study for the central and southern Florida system. And so you can see graphically or how all these overlay on top of each other and the complexities just at the federal level. But then all of these recognizing that we have to integrate these in with state efforts and with the local efforts with just flood risk management as an individual indicator or individual effort. Next slide. So now I'm going to go all the way back out to the federal level, maybe set and take a little more off Drew's plate to brief. Depends on who's briefing first, who gets to brief the Central and Southern Florida Project or the CNSF. And so those blue lines on the last slide are just the tail end of a broader system that was constructed basically from the late 40s through the 70s, authorized in 1948, called the Central and Southern Florida System. It effectively takes water all the way from Orlando down through Lake Okeechobee, distributes it in various locations all the way through South Florida. It is a massive system, multiple project purposes. And as you can see them, they're kind of listed out here: flood control, navigation, water supply, enhancement of fish and wildlife, and recreation. If you look at the water supply function of that, just generally, you're talking agricultural, municipal, industrial, also the water supply that we're trying to get down at Everglades National Park and keep that water flowing south as well, because sometimes we've got too much. We'd like it to get where it used to go, down all the way to Florida Bay. And so we built the system. It does exactly what it was intended to do. And I think there's a lot of growth in Florida that was based on this system being implemented, but now we realize there's some ecological impacts. And many years down the line, we're looking at how do we continue to improve it and maintain its function. And we'll talk about the comprehensive study next. Okay, so recently authorized study, to be clear, right? Because we're talking, we need the study authorized and funded, and then if that study sees
Colonel, I'm
viable.
just going to
Yes, sir.
interrupt briefly, just in case all of the members don't know, you do all have a copy of his presentation in front of you. So I know I'm following along from here. So just to let everyone know that.
Yes, sir, absolutely. And so recently authorized was the comprehensive study or another restudy on the central and southern Florida system, right? This would be the next one after we did one in the mid to late 90s. But really going back in and seeing what has changed in the system since it was constructed and how do we get after improving its capabilities across all those authorized purposes that I already talked about, but also, ecosystem restoration as well. And then you can see the central and southern Florida system 216 study, the area that the 216 is going to focus in on. So comprehensive study, recently authorized as a study, but not funded at this point to move out on it. The 216 resiliency study is authorized and funded at that $3 million level over multiple years at the federal level, and the state's been right along with us with both of these efforts in coordination. Next slide. All right, so the Central and Southern Florida Resiliency Study, you can take a look at what we've done over since all the advocacy that was out there that got this authorized and funded. Really went heavily after once. We were delayed a little bit because of the hurricanes that came through in October. We really got our start. We were delayed from October till about the beginning of the calendar year to scope this out, to understand what are the needs in the system and have open engagement with all the different agencies. Where we're at right now is basically we've broken it out into 4 different reaches. You kind of see them indicated here as A, B, C, and D. And they are areas, as we talked about, that really focus kind of around those salinity control structures, getting after the most urgent needs of the central and southern Florida system with the appropriation and the authority that we have under that 216 authority. And we got to the initial array of alternatives. We call that the AMM meeting in March of 2023. And so we have a series of steps as we go through a study where we, along with our non-federal sponsors, will brief different levels of the Army Corps of Engineers as how the study's progressing. That allows us to get what we call vertical alignment. That is a term that makes Drew probably cringed a little bit when I said vertical alignment. But just as in any organization, we've got to prove that as we step through a process that we're doing all the right steps. That means for Jacksonville District that we've got to brief an alternatives milestone to our division headquarters. But at the same time, that's in Atlanta. At the same time, we've got folks from our headquarters, Army Corps of Engineers in D.C., technical experts that are listening to where we are with the study and making sure that we're not missing steps. We don't want to do massive investments even with study funds and come out on the other end with a project that's not implementable. And so we have assessments that take a look at that, and then once we get thumbs up from all those levels, we call ourselves vertically aligned. And so in March, we did that first attempt to brief folks on where we were. We heard some concerns during that briefing as far as that we had taken all the steps to get that vertical alignment. I'll try and describe very briefly some of the concerns that we have been working through since March until now, and we're coming to the end of that discussion about, I told you the Corps of Engineers would look at a coastal storm risk management project through one silo and a flood risk management project through another. We have review teams and still do, that look at it from those perspectives. And as we briefed this integrated plan to them, we're having some discussions. Okay, what does storm surge mean as you look through that coastal storm risk management portion of it, up into the central and southern Florida system, into the flood risk management? And those two agencies, those groups within the Corps of Engineers, see them different, have operated under different types of perspectives, and we're working through helping them visualize and understand the impacts of that, as storm surge as an example, of how we are looking at it. We're looking at all these projects in an integrated approach, and sometimes we won't necessarily, with just the 216 study, address all the concerns that they have, but making sure that they're comfortable that throughout that pantheon of projects, as we integrate them, that we will address them as a whole. And so that's the kind of letting you inside the window of when we talk about the friction of becoming vertically aligned. Those are the discussions that we've been having over the last couple of months. And then we talk about that $3 million. The Corps of Engineers, when we go into a study over the last 10 years, has looked at 3 years, $3 million with vertical alignment. These studies that we're looking at are way more complex than what that 3 years, $3 million envisioned. And so along with 3x3, yes, sir, many have heard it. And so people are getting that, I say vertical alignment, it used to be 3 levels of review. So we used to be called 3x3x3. And so we're working through that and helping people wrap their heads around, okay, this study is probably looking more like 19 million. But we're still trying to move as quickly as possible to get a good study and investigation with the right modeling, but also so deliver it as quickly as possible, but do all the right steps. That takes some educating internal to the Army Corps of Engineers to make sure people are moving along with us as we're doing that communication. And so that's where we're at right now. We're kind of the tail end of that vertical alignment here over the next week or so. We expect to have been closing out, getting thumbs up through all those different chains and going back for a kind of a follow-up on our alternative milestone meeting to get that next step and thumbs up to keep moving forward. I apologize. I'm not sure. I wasn't watching my watch if I hit on the 20-minute period, but that's all I came to this group with. Happy to answer any questions or take questions on after Drew briefs.
I know you're going to be shocked that Dr. Hirado and I have questions, but Drew, I'll leave it up to you. I can ask both of you at the same time after you're done, or we can ask the Colonel first. What is your preference, Drew?
So why don't I go ahead and go, because I can layer on our efforts, and then we can think about it collectively.
In that case, Colonel Booth, thank you. Excellent report. We will, of course, have questions, and didn't want to put you into the hot seat here, but you can tell we do have some concerns. But thank you, and you've, according to everything I've been told, you've been a pleasure to work with, and none of our concerns are about you or even really the Army Corps. It's funding. It's all dollars. So, Drew, we'll get back.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator. And it's a pleasure for me to be here. I'm Drew Bartlett, the Executive Director for the South Florida Water Management District. It's good to see everyone. Senator Geller, I think that you should go on a speaking tour.
I spoke on this yesterday to the Broward workshop.
Very good. Go outside of the state, go north of South Florida, and take it on the road. I got a bus. We'll go. But it was very well done, and so I don't need to give a lot of my presentation, but I'll see if there's anything to add to it. So go ahead to the next slide. So you had a very similar graphic. It's funny, all our graphics teams, come up with very similar graphics. But that primary drainage system, that is the Central and South Florida drainage canal. It's the main artery. It's the interstate where all the water goes. If it's not functioning, the other waters aren't functioning as well either. And so you have the local control districts, you have neighborhoods, streets, that all has to work together. And if that primary drainage system isn't working as designed and intended, then it just backs up through that whole system, and then you have the troubles we're talking about. And you see the salinity control structure there. It is, that's the key piece in making that system drain. Next slide, please. So here's the difference, and this is why we are where we are. In 1940, that's when it all started, and that's when we started thinking about the Central and South Florida system and how to build a drainage system that serves South Florida. You can see in 1940, there was mostly agriculture, not a whole lot of cities, and so when it rains on agriculture like that, there's not a need to move the water as rapidly as you do now. And so now that this is in 2021 aerial, you can see that that interconnected canal system is what provides the flood protection in a very different way than was necessary in 1940, where plants like to have water in their feet, to wade in it for a little while. So it's a very different system, so we do have changed conditions. Next slide, please. Go ahead and hit the. So there's the, you had the picture, I have the movie, of the water coming over the top of the gate at that structure. That was a very unusual event, honestly, but it can happen where you have salt water coming over a gate that's supposed to prevent that from happening into the freshwater canal. Clearly, we can't let water out in a condition like that. It wasn't raining right then, but if it did, we'd be in trouble. The graph you see on the lower left, that is the number of times over the years where the tailwater is higher than the headwater of a structure. So you can see the performance of the structure. You're losing that capability more and more with every passing year, where if it's, as the senator said, tailwater is higher than the headwater, you can't really open the gate. And we saw that when Ian went through. And you can just look at our online system and see that when we are trying to provide flood control, when that band went across on Ian, the gate's closed at high tide, it goes to low tide, it opens, high tide comes back in, it closes, and so it's that interim operation. It's not just open, providing flood control. It's open, shut, open, shut. So that obviously takes longer to drain when you're in a situation like that. It happens every year. It's probably happening today in South Miami-Dade County, where that's the operation. All right, next slide, please. So here's my cartoon of the lost table. So the top is what it was designed to be, right? So that top graphic where you have the canal basically lowering the groundwater table so that it could absorb rainfall. Then on the lower left, you have the canal with sea level rise, which can only be operated like I discussed, which keeps the groundwater table higher, much less ability to absorb the rain when the rain happens. And then you have a extreme rainfall event, and there you have generally the way we're all designed. The houses are higher, the streets are lower. Street flooding is often expected when you have extreme rainfall, but it's going to happen more and more. And so there's the car that should be the houseboat in order to get from point A to point B, because we've lost that storage in the whole system because of sea level rise. Next slide, please. And so we do studies, and I know the Corps is joining us with the study now, but we have been doing studies for some time. Dr. Akin Awosina has been very active over the past decade or more, putting together assessments and analyses of our basically level of service, how well we can provide that flood control. And so what you have on the left side is the current condition, which talks about that frequency of rainfall and what we're trying to provide. And the way it was originally designed, it was about a 25-year rainfall event. That's when you would have more challenges providing that flood control. But right now, for a lot of the Broward and Miami-Dade canals, you're at 5-year or lower rainfall event. And on the right, that's a 2-foot sea level rise, where it all gets to less than 5-year rainfall events. So that's where we've seen the projections, and this is how we prioritize each of these basins as to we need to get on top of these basins to try to do projects to get back to a level of service, the 1 in 25-year, 1 in 20-year level of service, so we can extend the life of this system for flood control. Sure.
On the future, what year is that?
It is the year where 2 feet of sea level rise comes to us. So 50 years from now, out. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
So anyway, that's why the problem needs solutions now, because we already have a problem currently, but certainly we will as the seas continue to rise. Next slide, please. And of course, we all have our what happened in Fort Lauderdale slide, because this demonstrates a 1 in 1,000 year storm event, which is mind-boggling. But what I included this because we think of a recurring storm event, 1 in 100 years, is usually the one that's the extreme rainfall, 1 in 100 years. And I will tell you, somewhere in the South Florida Water Management District every year, we have a 1 in 100 year storm event. It happens every year somewhere, right? It's 16 counties. We have flood control operations throughout those whole counties. So I have to prepare for the 1 in 100 year for every year, right? So that's the kind of situation we're in. Next slide. So that's why, and of course, if you don't know her now, Dr. Carolina Moran on the back wall, she is trained by Dr. Gerardo, probably not 100%. Obi, very good. So she joined the district about 3 years ago and has really not taken a breath since, as we have been putting together our own, independent of the Corps, bringing the Corps into the fold, flood resiliency plan for South Florida Water Management District. And that's where we bring all the studies we've been investing in. We've been investing in the storm studies, the flood studies, all these studies to figure out how to start fixing the situation, right? So up on the upper left, that is one of our studies that looks at the C8 basin in Miami-Dade County to show with an extreme rainfall what areas would flood and how do we address that flooding situation. This resiliency plan, it started at about $1.5 billion plan. I think it's like a $2 to $2.5 billion, maybe even $3 billion plan to try to address the situation we've been talking about here today. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So we need the Corps of Engineers because we need their money, right? We need their expertise, but we definitely need their money. And that's because, so they will come in and help us with our $3 billion resiliency plan. They're not the only funding source, which is why I need you to go on a speaking tour. There's funding for through FEMA, Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities. There's funding through the state with their resiliency planning studies and infrastructure pot of funds. And so we're chasing funds. Carolina and her staff chase funds every day. It's so much so that she can't say the word grant when she goes home in the evening because they're tired of hearing of it. But they put grants together, and we did receive a $50 million grant for this structure, which is the S28 structure on the C8 basin. The no regret solution, we have to do a lot of work throughout all of these basins with the water control districts and everything. But one no regret solution is adding pumps to these downstream structures. So we're not doing the gates closed, gate open, gate closed. We can always move water out when we need to move water out. They're massive pumps. At full build out, it's a $150 million project to get these size pumps on these structures. For this grant award, no, it's the whole structure. Yeah, $150 million. Correct. One canal location. Good clarification. One pump station on one canal is about that much money. It's more than just adding the pump to the station. You have to do downstream work, upstream work on the canal banks, those types of things for the conveyance and flood protection upstream and downstream. And in this one, we have a green infrastructure component where there's a golf course right next to the structure that we're partnering with the local government to be able to use in these high rainfall events to store water as we're trying to move the water out through that pump station and structure in these high rainfall events. So we did get the award. It's a federal grant. Haven't received the grant yet, so there's a lot of paperwork involved, but that is designed, and we're looking forward to starting construction. So we're continuing to chase, as you saw, the prioritization in those color graphs. We're continuing to chase grants to do these no-regret solutions, to add pumps to these downstream structures. Was about a decade or more ago, there was 2 added in the C4 canal down in Miami-Dade. We've done it before, and we're trying to get ahead of it because it needs to happen. Next slide, please. So this was through the Florida Resilient Florida program. We did get a grant from DEP to basically harden all of our existing structures. You saw the overtopping of that one structure. If we could retrofit the gate to put more elevation in that gate, we could seal the gate better, we could raise the electronics, bring the electronics up to snuff, raise generators, raise machines, deal with storm surge. So we got a grant, it was awarded this year to work on more than 20 of our structures to try to make them more resilient. This is what need to happen in preparation for adding pumps at some point, but this is, it's less expensive because you can retrofit, it's smaller equipment, those kind of things. So we got the grant, we've got the match, we're gonna go ahead and start working on all of our structures to make them, we call it self-preservation modes, make them ready to operate under storm surge and under conditions and be able to deal with sea level rise a little better as a structure standing alone. Next slide. And then, of course, when Governor DeSantis started his second term, he did sign the Achieving Even More Now for Florida's Environment Executive Order, which did amp up his and recommit his investments in resiliency. But this is where he also committed to Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Program. I've started to articulate that we could rename Comprehensive Everglades Restoration to Comprehensive Everglades Resiliency Program. Because if you think about what that restoration does, it does make South Florida more resilient. It gets more water into our water supply, which is the Everglades. It keeps water in the system around Lake Okeechobee, so we have it for the dry season. It keeps our flood control and improves our flood control efforts because it adds pumps, it adds reservoirs, it adds infrastructure to help us going forward. So not only does it restore the Everglades, it makes us more sustainable in South Florida. Next slide, please. This is the graph. We are very supportive. The $19 million needed for the 216 study, we're responsible for half of that. We've committed to it. We've got that lined up. We're ready to go on it. If you think about the comprehensive study versus the 216 study, my message is do not pivot to the comprehensive. You need to do the 216 right now. It is timely. It is where we have our problems existing already. That needs to happen now, and then build that into the comprehensive 216 study. Now, I can tell you that Broward County, Palm Beach County, South Florida Water Management District have a lot of information that can underpin the 216 study already and the comprehensive study already. So hopefully that can be built upon and get this study done sooner rather than later, so that we have a great partner in the Corps of Engineers as we try to retrofit our system in Southeast Florida. Next. And there you go. That's it. I'm happy to take any questions unless they're from Dr. Harado or Paul Linton.
Unfortunately, there will be questions and comments. The first, let me tell you quickly, in case you haven't seen this slide, the United States Department of Commerce Economic Development Administration requires a CEDS, a Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy report for each of the areas of the country every 5 years. And the CEDS for Southeast Florida, which for some reason does not include Palm Beach, it's Monroe, Dade, and Broward, which by a coincidence I happen to chair, issued a report as part of this. Remember I was talking about the tropical, subtropical. Have you seen this chart? If not, I'll leave this chart with you. It is the COPIN, K-O with the 2 dots over it, climate types of Florida. And that's the one that says, and I was wrong, it's subtropical for northern Florida. It's tropical for the rest of the state, for Southeast Florida. So it is tropical, monsoon, and rainforest. And Greg, could you, I'm sorry, if you could just ask you to give them that. Okay, so that was number one. I have a couple of questions. Number one, you all heard my scree, or my, whatever you want to call that passion speech. Was I wrong? I mean, do you have any reason to believe that currently we're not going to be underwater when it rains or unable to drain normally in, let's say, give or take 11, 12, 13 years? right now, do you have any good news to disagree with what I said?
So everyone envisions what an arc is, and I know you've challenged me to say, am I wrong on the arc? I would be more inclined for a houseboat, because what we observe most of the time is that street flooding, and what we're talking about is there is a time period where the time period for recovering that flooding is getting longer and longer and longer. We will recover the flooding, but it takes longer to do it. And so that is the challenge. There is a time horizon, right, where it becomes overwhelming. What we're trying to retrofit is to gain 50 years, 100 years, 150 years, right? And so it's trying to create the sustainability over time. But we've seen it. I mean, we saw it with Hurricane Ada in Broward County, where the street flooding out west. I mean, it was out on the western side of Broward County, and that was a challenge for us. But that's that street flooding that can get it. We saw it after Ian up in the north part of the district, where it got just to the lip of houses and garages, that kind of thing. And then it's there for a week or two, or that kind of thing. So that's when you'll need your houseboat.
Okay, I'll accept that it's houseboats and not arcs. Colonel, you have 3 million, was my understanding, for the 216 study, and you need 19. And the SFWMD has said that they're in for 9.5, I think, of the 19, 50%. Are you able to start the program now, or do you need authorization for the full 19 million before you can start it?
So I appreciate the question, and it gives me an opportunity to clarify one thing that I may have either misstated or alluded to, that on the resiliency study, the 216 study, that it had stopped, and it is not. We continue to move forward on all actions that we need to maintain the schedule. But that we talked about that 3 by 3 by 3.
Yeah, 3.
When you go over that, when a district has to go over that in any particular study, that's when we have to go up our chain of command to get the vertical alignment to make that change. And that's that process that I was trying to describe. We used to do it towards the tail end of the study, years into the study. The course changed to where on the front end of the study, just after we scoped it, to get that we call vertical alignment, to get approval for the increased cost and the increased time. And that's the process that I'm trying to describe that we're doing early now.
I have been led to believe that until you have that approval from higher sources, that you can't really, I mean, you may be able to do some preliminary stuff, but you can't really do the 219 study until you get that approval. Is that correct?
We would not be able to get through the entire study with the $3 million 3 years that the Corps is currently authorized. And so, to be clear, we're continuing to march along what we need to get the whole study done with the funds that we have. South Florida has actually helped us out with some of those funds to keep things moving and keep the schedule going while we get that alignment to get the approval to get through the whole study with the scope that we currently envision. And so we are continuing to progress, but if we didn't get approval, then no, we could not get through it with the scope that we currently have. But we're in that process to get that approval right now.
Okay, in terms of funding, by the way, Drew, we could not agree with you more that we don't want this to get caught up in the entire restudy, because that will be a lot of money and a lot of years before that's done. We need this to stay separate. But in order to do all of this, it's my understanding is, and you don't know how much it'll cost until you do the study, but between the banks or the berms and the pumps, not only on the big canals, but on the little canals to get into the big canals, it will be billions and billions of dollars. Do you have any reason to think we're getting that funding anytime soon? Because I don't.
If you're talking about getting to the construction and how will that be funded after you get through the study process, could not opine on it. But I mean, Executive Director Bartlett just stated what what goes into doing one pump station. I'm sorry, what was it, Drew, 150 million? Or?
150.
Yeah, about 150.
I mean, so you can imagine what this would look at on a much broader scale.
I think-
All of our infrastructure projects are very expensive, but very important.
Are there 18 of them? Yeah, okay. So there's about 18 at 150 million each, but again, that doesn't include the smaller pumps on the secondary canals, doesn't include the berms. I mean, it's a lot of money, and I'm just worried we're never going to see that.
So I always want to be very clear, and I do this time and time again. Drew's probably sick of hearing me say this, right? As an Army Corps of Engineers officer, I don't go out and look for funds, and I don't lobby for authority or funds.
Understand.
But I would say what has to happen at the local level and all the levels of government is there's got to be advocacy. If the individual citizen of the United States needs that help, then they've got to be part of a broader advocacy process that we've certainly seen. And I think South Florida is doing an amazing job of coming together, recognizing what that threat is, and speaking with one voice clearly. But that's got to be a continued, dedicated effort.
Okay, last question I'm having, then I know Dr. Hirado has, and then I'll throw it open. This is actually to Drew. Drew, you may be aware the South Florida Regional Planning Council, which by coincidence I'm also the chair of, has sent a letter, and I think we're expecting one from the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council. South Florida is Dade, Broward, Monroe. Treasure Coast is Palm Beach, Martin, Indian River, and St. Lucie counties. Asking the South Florida Water Management District to stop the continued rollback that y'all are doing, and to not keep reducing your millage rate, because we think we're desperately going to need that money for this program to keep us from flooding. So just letting you know what the SFRPC, which by the way, representative gubernatorial appointees, representative of counties and cities in those three passed it unanimously, asking. You've seen that letter, I assume?
Yeah, I have, and I do appreciate it. It's good to know that the support is there, and as we build our budget for this summer, resiliency is actually very front and center in building that budget.
We just wanted to let you know that, and we know it's always difficult to not do that, and we wanted to show you there was other government support for that. Dr. Hirado, I think you had some questions for Colonel Kelly. And okay, did you? She had some questions which are too technical for me to ask.
No, thank
Probably
you.
means they're too technical for me to answer, but
They
I'll
are
phone a
not.
friend if necessary.
They are not at all. And I think that you've responded to them in part. I really was seeking clarification because the Corps has made reference a number of times to the waiver process and the need to request this waiver. And so some of the questions that we had is in terms of looking for additional funds to help supplement what's needed for the 216 study. Can those appropriations be requested or justified until there has been a formal request or a communication by the Corps that the additional funds are needed for this waiver? And so really trying to understand the formality of that process. And, so I'll start with that. I mean, can there be an additional allocation outside of the formal request? And it sounds like there's internal conversation, but when does it become memorialized in an additional need? Or
Do you see why I had to have her ask it?
Oh, I will. The question you asked, I think, speaks to Congress's process as they go through their fiscal year appropriations process, but also how the Army Corps at headquarters works with the Office of Management and Budget. And ultimately, the funding line, the account that we're talking about is the investigations account. And so Congress typically is going to authorize a certain amount in any given year for investigations. And so that funding process envisions typically studies at 3 years and $3 million. We are looking at something that's higher than that now that we've scoped it out and we understand what it is, trying to get that alignment with the Corps headquarters. I think the next funding threshold is going to be the fiscal year 24 appropriations, and how much Congress authorizes to the Corps for investigations sets the pie on the table. that the entire nation's going to have to look at to continue all the studies that are going on in the nation. Right now, the resiliency study, until it gets that thumbs up from the Corps, is looking at on any given year, 500,000 to $1 million for one of those 3x3 studies. And so that's what's kind of in the books right now. But as we're telling Corps headquarters, we're going to need, was it 19 million over? I'm sorry.
18.9.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, what was the total years, Ava? Just under 4 years. So, so we've got to communicate to the Corps, and then the Corps headquarters will be working with Office of Management Budget in the budgeting cycle if they approve that waiver process. And so the key on the funding issues, and I can't speak to how at the local level everyone needs to engage up through Congress, but the funding that's going to come from the federal side. We are funded right now to get through this current fiscal year and the beginning portions of fiscal year 24. But to continue on the federal side for that $19 million effort, it's going to need additional appropriations likely. And that's got to go through that process. I can't speak to the eaches and the nuances. I know the budgeting at the district level. I don't have the congressional and OMB process.
And just as a follow-up question, if there are currently funds that are unallocated in the Corps' investigations line and could be earmarked, I'm going to call it designated, for a 216 study that's already authorized, does that sit within the capacity of the Army Corps to make that internal prioritization if the prioritization is articulated, or does it require a separate appropriations process if the funds are already there and not allocated to another project?
I'm starting to swing above my weight in what's going on with between Corps headquarters and Office of Management and Budget. There is flexibility for reallocation depending on what the funding lines are, up to certain amounts. But I couldn't speak to the specifics if there is any. So I just can't answer the question of the fidelity I think you're looking for.
I appreciate that, thank you. So I think it's important to know that we had an opportunity to communicate with Deputy Assistant Secretary Pinkham about this project and the fact that the funding was needed at the level of 19 million and that it currently wasn't funded at that level. And to the extent that the Army Corps is able to make that prioritization internally as part of their own recommendation, it may be appropriate to think about how we communicate to congressional leadership that they urge the Corps. I don't know how, and I would look to Marty, who is in our Office of Intergovernmental Affairs, and we have lobbyists to help us with that communication, because we did communicate that to the Deputy Assistant Secretary, and we need to figure out a way that that's reinforced, please. I would think that would be within the capacity.
And we will continue working on that. This is taking a little more time than I hoped, but I think we needed it. Let me ask first, South Florida Water Management member and Broward County Water Advisory Board member, Alligator Ron, if he has any comments, and then I'll ask anyone else at the table if they have any comments. Commissioner Bergeron, you're recognized, sir.
Well, thank you, sir. I'm not going to repeat what's already been talked about, but I do want to thank Drew and the Colonel, the Corps, South Florida Water Management, for being here today. And believe me, it's on our radar. And I've got to say that our partnership with the U.S. Corps and 1,500 strong at South Florida Water Management, covering 16 counties, 9 million people from Orlando to Key West, from the Gulf of Mexico to the Atlantic. We hear you. We want to continue to communicate, and it's a serious problem that we all need to work together. It's all about we. I know you hear that all the time, Drew. But and I'm honored to be your board member and represent Broward County. And it's extremely important what we're talking about today. And so I want to thank everyone for being here. I'm honored to to be appointed by the governor. I will say, Everglades restoration is a part of this resilience too. And it is the largest environmental restoration in the history of the world. And the journey of water is the life of Florida, from sawgrass to seagrass. And like the colonel had mentioned, the quantity, the quality, the timing, and distribution. These are very, very important goals and missions for all of us down here in South Florida. So I want to thank everyone, and I'm 24/7 to represent South Florida. And thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Ron. Commissioner Ryan, I know you had some comments.
I was interested in what Dr. Hirado mentioned about the funding issues, and there's kind of a convergence of the infrastructure bill and its importance on commerce, and I'm thinking in particular Port Everglades, and the Corps has been with us on this for years, decades. I mean, we waited 17 years to get the permit for the deepening and the widening, but things have really accelerated since then. And I'm just wondering about a convergence between water resources, water management, and a discussion of transportation and commerce, and the interrelationship between the two of them. Obviously the importance of all of the oil that comes in, the fuel for 16 South Florida counties, comes through Port Everglades, and that importance there, and being able to move those tanker trucks in and out. And we saw what happened after the 24 inches of rain. I mean, it took us, I guess, about 10 days to really get back up online and to be able to have the tankers, the tanker trucks, access the facilities and to be able to get back out on the road. And we were bringing in fuel from, all around the state and other parts of the nation. So that was really important. And I just want to get your impression on what funding opportunities we can have by trying to have an interrelationship between the transportation commerce and the water management component. That's for both of you guys. That's an easy one.
Well, we are certainly considering them all. I think it does go back to that discussion I had about kind of those funding silos for the Corps, navigation, investigations. But we're certainly looking at those at the Jacksonville District and increasing the discussions on how they're interrelated. Bipartisan infrastructure law did provide funds that is due, that some of it, we at the Jacksonville District got 1.1 billion for Everglades restoration out of the bill, but there's also funds that came in for operation and maintenance of navigation projects as well. So I think there's a recognition at the national level and the federal level that all of that's important and interacts. And certainly as we look at all the different focus areas that we have that we talked about, that we're doing projects that are done in an environmentally friendly way, but also acknowledging that that's critical infrastructure that does get after how do we keep South Florida fueled and get the right capacity at the ports.
And your thoughts on that, Drew?
Yeah, the intersection between linear efforts is astounding, right? I mean, so we have linear canals that we work with, and DOT has linear roads, and then you throw in FPL with linear lines. It's a constant collaboration. And so Everglades Restoration has retrofitting roads because roads can act as a hydrologic barrier, right? And then in flood control, it's usually the roads we're trying to save. But, it's evacuation routes, it's transportation, it's all those kind of things. So the need to collaborate on all of those three, I threw in power as well, it's a daily thing we do.
Commissioner, we're going to need to.
Yeah. So I just have one more question.
Yes, sir.
So when you you look at and I think Dr. Hirado may be speaking about this with her presentation on resiliency that's coming up. Is so how do we ensure that going forward we are able to handle on-site as much as possible of water that we have from these large events. You have sometimes, I mean, in larger, especially residential projects, you have land that's set aside, for water capacity, but, on these smaller projects, you do this deep well injections and things like that. So, I'm just, wondering, and probably this will be more for your presentation, so I'm just have an observation. If you will cover that, and, what kind of programs and plans do we have going forward with land development?
Commissioner, I'll ask Dr. Hirado to address that. I know that Commissioner Halpern, I'm going to call in next. Are there any other hands? No. All right. So, no. Okay. Okay. So the last two speakers before I move on will be Commissioner Halpern and Commissioner Good. Commissioner Halpern, you're recognized, ma'am.
Thank you. So I'm Dee Dee Halpern, and I'm new to the Palm Beach County Water Resources Task Force.
Isn't this fun?
It's fascinating. So my first question is for Mr. Bartlett. Throughout your district, are you seeing any saltwater intrusion into the drinking water systems?
Over time, we have, yes. And it's generally down in the Miami and Broward counties where the wells were located too close to the coast. And they had to basically stop using those wells and relocate wells. But yeah, it is an absolute challenge.
And in North County?
I don't think I would
Like
have
Palm Beach County?
Palm Beach County. Do you know, Paul, whether we've had that
If
challenge?
there's been saltwater intrusion?
Yes, we've had it. Jupiter responded to a problem and moved their well fields west and added Florida, and then there's a couple other areas, Delray, and there's that, and some of them are still vulnerable to sea level rise from a well field standpoint, because to get the levels low to provide the drainage, you're enticing seawater and Charleston.
Right.
So.
Right.
Okay, thank you. And my other question is for both of you, and I'm sorry if this has been covered already, but do you have similar presentations with Palm Beach County specific data, or North County, like from the Delray North, that you could present at a future meeting?
Probably I'll have to turn to Dr. Moran. Yeah, this year.
And to the Colonel as well.
Since this is being televised, Drew, could you repeat what she said?
Yeah, so this year we'll have more information on Palm Beach County. It's a higher elevation county, so it hasn't been as threatened as Miami and Dade today.
And Army Corps projects?
Yes, ma'am. That overlay slide that I showed graphically, we have a version that goes further north as well. Yes, ma'am.
And Dr. Hirado, I think you had some additional information on that.
Yeah, Commissioner Halpern, I just wanted to acknowledge that with the 216 study, we recognize that it did have a strong focus on Miami-Dade and Broward, because those structures were most immediately exposed. But we had coordinated very closely with Megan Houston and the leadership, acknowledging that everything that happens with this study is directly transferable and will aid the expansion, and that it's just a matter of most immediacy that to focus where we were, but that again, the next step is absolutely to take it further north, and it wasn't intended to be, ignoring of the priorities to the north.
I'm sure. Thank you.
Thank you. And final speaker is Commissioner Good. You're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Senator. I very much appreciate you recognizing me. I just have a very brief statement. I just want to say thank you for everybody for being here. Thank you for the presentations. Presentations were very, very informative. It was very clear that we do have issues as you presented them. We're certainly, faced with a sense of urgency and things. But I got to say that the one thing that the Colonel Booth said, I think is very, very important is we do recognize there's a problem, but I do believe that we need a broader advocacy base for funding so that we can move forward and get these projects done, because we've heard several times that seems to be the limiting factor. So, but to you, Senator, I want to say, you did a great job of scaring me enough that I am going to look to move close to Alligator Ron, so that way that he can protect my dogs from alligators. Thanks, sir.
Thank you. And actually, I apologize. There is one more speaker because I didn't recognize that they were online, but that is the last speaker, and that's Mr. Block, I believe. Chairman Block. Chairman Block of the chair of the Water Resources, Palm Beach Water Resources Task Force. Mr. Chair, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to apologize to everyone. My secretary, who is me, had this meeting down for 1:30. So I'm sorry to miss the meeting, but I'm glad I got on Zoom because I think the presentations have been terrific. And Steve, continue your strong advocacy. We'll do everything to support you. Thank you.
I intend to. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just in conclusion, I just want to say, both Drew and Colonel, I want you to be clear that we in Broward County recognize the good work that, our very close relationship with the South Florida Water Management District. Colonel, we've had nothing but cordial relationships with the Corps, with your predecessor, with you. The problem is not that you guys aren't doing things. Problem is this is a really big project that needs a ton of money that we don't have, and we have not seen the rapidity of progress that we think is necessary. And but I did want to thank both of you and your organizations. You've been wonderful to work with. I don't want you to think we're complaining. We are complaining, but not about you. Okay, so thank you, gentlemen.
Sir, appreciate the partnership, and thanks for having us here.
Yep,
Thank you.
thank you.
The way, I apologize, this has taken, this was supposed to be done with that portion at approximately 11:30, and it's now 11:45. I normally try and end my meetings promptly on time. Is it okay with everybody here if we extend to 12:15? Well, 12:15, 12:20? Okay. All right. In that case, we will be able to complete the agenda. Dr. Hirado, you're recognized, ma'am.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction, and I'll move very quickly, but I know the purpose was to allow an opportunity for staff to share our respective kind of local, countywide efforts focused on advancing resilience and acknowledging that this all fits into what the requests are relating to the regional management of the flood control system to support our resilience as well. So very briefly, I just wanted to acknowledge that our team works quite intensely all the time to work to advance our Commission's priorities relating to climate and resilience that are very well detailed within our own countywide climate action plan, very directly aligned and compatible with the recommendations that have come from the four-county collaborative, and most recently the completion and adoption of the Regional Climate Action Plan 3.0, as well as the iterations to the regional sea level rise projection. And we know that a lot of these work products and policy directions move much more quickly than the work that follows, and so we're constantly in a process of working to update and align what happens at a technical regulatory planning level with the Commission's policy directives. And so this is a iterative process. I want to note that we rely significantly, maybe shouldn't say publicly, but on the authorities that we have as a local government, and very significant have been, land use authorities, water quality authorities working to help support implementation that's so critical to, the function of our systems. We have adopted a priority planning area map that has gone through numerous iterations, now reflecting the 3.3-foot sea level rise scenario as part of our land use map series. This is really critical because when we have land use amendments that come into our process, if they fall within this area of increased risk flooding, and this is very similar to adaptation action areas that are allowed under state law as well, our projects get put through an additional layer of review. I want to note that we have been able to work with developers and cities to advance significant resilience requirements for projects that otherwise would not have happened, for virtue of being able to gain an endorsement or statement of compatibility as it relates to our Commission's climate and policy only, and there are other instances where we may simply not be able to recognize that type of alignment. And then, of course, that comes down to a board decision about what happens with those projects. But that has been a really important tool, helping to ensure that when development does occur in areas that we know to be at risk, that we're maximizing the resilience opportunities as part of those projects. And it's been an excellent collaboration with cities and developers, as I noted. We've also been able to embed resilience requirements within our requirements for drainage and surface water management systems, in part to the questions that Commissioner Ryan asked. We've adopted future conditions maps that now require that drainage and surface water systems be developed in accordance with the change in the groundwater table. Currently, through 2-foot sea level rise scenario, we're working on an update for 3.3 feet. We've adopted county-wide requirements for municipalities to adopt a consistent seawall standard or berm, whatever that tidal flood barrier is. We now have those elevations built into our code, and that's been successfully implemented since 2020. We've adopted future conditions flood elevations consistent with sea level rise, rainfall intensification, groundwater table rise. So that's on the books, and we're in the process of doing more work that now accounts for the 3.3-foot sea level rise as well as storm surge, which I'll introduce in a moment. With respect to the design storms and the rainfall intensification, we did, again, bring that into the 100-year flood maps. We, at that time, made a rainfall adjustment of 13% intensification. Our current effort increases that further. And the asterisks are areas where we have work underway, which is most notably our effort to fully account for the full confluence of flood conditions that occur with all the various kind of forcers on flood. And it's not necessarily that we anticipate that all infrastructure can be designed to those standards, but at least to acknowledge what those conditions look like and understand what we're leaving on the table when we decide to design to something lesser. We're currently in that process. I just wanted to share here, and this is an important work product because we've been able to work with our technical advisory committee. We gained a motion of support at our last meeting for advancing an update to our groundwater table map that we will focus most currently on the coastal area with that increase from the 2 to the 3.3 foot sea level rise scenario. We know that our groundwater table has already risen more than a foot in this area. We know we have a lot of redevelopment, critical redevelopment that's happening in this area, and we just want to be sure that when that development takes place, we're accounting for this change in groundwater table and putting into place the right systems to deal with drainage under future conditions. So the effort today is now about taking this whole body of work that I just went through in that detailing of initiatives and to bring it now not only to what are the design requirements for new infrastructure, but how do we go back and give a landscape look across our entire community and recognize that not every area is slated for redevelopment, not every site is going to be the site of redevelopment, and how do we meet the floodwater management needs that's across the community as a whole. So we've contracted this project out. You can see that there's a number of elements involved, including a countywide risk assessment, economic modeling in terms of the return on investment that comes with this organized infrastructure improvement plan. It involves planning level cost estimates so that we'd be able to take this to the next scale for funding. We're working with the cities and water managers across the entire county on the model details and getting ready to move into the adaptation scenarios, and this will all be supported with a community outreach component as well as technical planning platform through online platform that will be accessible to all of our cities, our county, our planning agency partners, the water management, DOT, MPO, etc. Shown here is the full detailing of suite of flood scenarios that are making up the modeled no action and action scenarios. We did work with the water management district, recognizing that they were advancing additional work on rainfall intensification, and here we are adjusting our rainfall intensity from the 13 to the 20% for the 100-year and other storm events. At the time at which we were being flooded on April 12th, in the very same instant, in this very same room, we were sharing these model results, which was our first debut of the data in a viewer system that allows us to share the flood scenarios for all of those combinations that I showed in the previous slide. And this ended up being, as I think we all learned from severe events, an opportunity as well to look at how is our model and these same scenarios comparing to a 1 in 1,000 year event, even though we're not modeling intentionally a 1 in 1,000 year event. How do those water levels compare? And timely, because in situations where we're looking at potential water levels of 2 and 3 feet, can we even imagine what that looks like? And it's one thing to say that we acknowledge roads will be flooded, but at what extent? And what does that actually mean in terms of safety, losses of property, conditions under an evacuation order, for example, and really appreciating what that means in our communities. So very quickly, I won't go through this in detail, but I just want to acknowledge we have gone through the exercise with our team, and we have found that there's fairly strong alignment between the conditions that we modeled for the combined storm surge, 3.3 feet sea level rise, groundwater table rise, and rainfall intensification, and king tides. All of those things together produced water levels that were quite similar to what we saw in the areas impacted with the 1 in 1,000 year. Again, not to say that you design all your infrastructure around that, but we know what it looks like, and we know that when we design to something else that will likely be lesser, there will still be this incremental, water that we need to deal with. But at least we have some truthing of the conditions that were modeled versus observed. And here's just some examples from one particular area. Here you can see that we had it's actually cut off some of my numbers here, but we had modeled something on the order of 3 feet. We saw a reported water value of 3 feet. Similar on the graphics on the bottom. I apologize, but some of those numbers seem to have been cut off. And the same scenario for another area here around Davie Boulevard. And I only wanted to conclude on the technical level in noting that there had been some estimations that this flood event didn't really test our water management system because the rainfall occurred downstream. Well, we knew that there was significant flooding around the swap shop off Sunrise Boulevard, and I asked our team to look at the water levels in the C12 canal that we know serves as a discharge point for areas north and south there. We found a 5-foot water level rise in that canal relative to standard operations during this storm. 5-foot increase, and we haven't yet had the chance to explore the extent to which flooding in that area was influenced by the higher water levels. We can anticipate that to some extent it was, but just to acknowledge this reinforces why we need rainfall intensification to be included in the 216 study, which has been a point of argument as they've gone through the scoping process. There's been disagreement about whether rainfall intensification be included, and I think we have strong demonstration of why that's needed. And so as we move forward with our own study, again, we'll be looking to bring not only the vulnerability assessment and the impacts, but come back to the economic considerations. We're really building upon the work that we undertook as a compact, which was the business case for resilience, and why the value that comes with immediate investment, not only in the way of avoided impacts, but the opportunities, the insurance benefits, the bond rating, the financing, really bringing that down to the Broward County level to help build the basis for a strong, coordinated, sustained infrastructure improvement plan. Just additional information on how we're looking to quantify those benefits. Okay. And just to tie back to the presentations.
Dr. Rado, we're going to need to wrap it up. Okay, so just.
Yeah, and I got it. And to tie back to the presentations, just acknowledging the delays with the CNSF system, if they occur, shift the burdens to local governments to have to find that additional water management capacity elsewhere in the system where we know it doesn't really exist in any event. But it does transfer a great deal of financial responsibility back to the counties. And concluding with the elements of our resilience plan and the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will ask Dr. Hirado to make this presentation again in more detail at our next Broward Water Advisory meeting, but we need to leave time for Palm Beach. So, Palm Beach. I would like to, at this point, call on Megan Houston, Director, Palm Beach County Office of Resilience, I understand, Ms. Houston, that you're present on, yes, I see you now. So you're recognized, ma'am. Thank you for attending on Zoom.
Thank you. We just shifted into the afternoon, so good afternoon, everyone.
Good
And
point.
thank you for having me. Well, just, yeah, and I will be brief. I know Paul has some slides as well. So I'm going to be speaking a little bit about the how Palm Beach County's Resilience Office is dealing with the vulnerability assessment and resilience action planning, and really helping to coordinate with our municipalities on flooding and sea level rise concerns. Are you all able to see my slides?
We are, ma'am.
Okay, great. So we started a few years ago with our Coastal Resilience Partnership. We took a role as a county in working with our 7 cities in Southeast Palm Beach County. We were all experiencing flooding and sea level rise, coastal erosion, but hadn't yet joined forces, hadn't yet, I think, you know, to my knowledge, there are only a couple of jurisdictions in Palm Beach County that really worked on doing climate resiliency planning and looking at flooding in the way that we now think of as vulnerability assessments. So we worked together with these from Boca, Lantana, Ocean Ridge, Boynton Beach, to share resources, share staff time, and apply for funding to complete this multi-jurisdictional climate change vulnerability assessment. Still one of our best examples of how we've, you know, water is everything, and we work together across jurisdictions, and this was one example of doing so. We looked at 12 different threats that we identified. You'll notice the bluish ones are the water-related threats that we examined. And we also considered sea level rise as an exacerbating factor, not a specific threat itself. How that's moving forward now. So that was, you know, one example, right? The Coastal Resilience Partnership, very little Palm Beach County unincorporated real estate. And that was before Resilient Florida funding. So now we're in this new world, Resilient Florida we love, about $80 million between planning and implementation grants have come into Palm Beach County and municipalities. About $50 million of that is municipality focus. So that's really exciting. And we're in this bigger, so we also got Resilient Florida funding along with DEO and supplemental funding from our county to now look at all of unincorporated Palm Beach County, as well as our western communities, Belle Glade, South Bay, Pahokee. If you're familiar, HUG, the Lake Okeechobee region, they are no strangers to flooding. Historical floods have been part of that community's history. And so we have some infrastructure challenges out there. We wanted to partner with them because it does take quite a bit of staff time, even though we have the funding to do this, to manage and compile teams. And so we are continuing to partner where it's appropriate and helping to build capacity. We're going to get 30 identified projects through this of, you know, resiliency priority projects. That was one of the selling points of the consultant whom we hired, was that we were going to have that ability to say, this is what we need to now fund. These are our high priority projects. Now we can target grant funding and such. I mentioned capacity, right? So we have our Tetra Tech and consultant team group, which I think is about 5 partners, 3 to 5 partners within the consultant team. But our staff capacity, you know, Paul's involved. Our GIS director is amazing in helping to supply the data. We're asking, you know, per the Resilient Florida guidelines, 10 different people from our engineering department to zoning, et cetera, to participate, as well as our Glades municipalities. So it really is a big staff time commitment, and we're working on these next steps, you know, getting the data, scheduling the outreach, doing the steering committee outreach. And then we're using some of our funding to fly and get new LiDAR data for our Glades region. A prelude to this work was having 3 community workshops that we had in Belle Glade, Pahokee, and Central Palm Beach County. We always talk about infrastructure and big projects, but sometimes it's nice to, or it's important to hear, how is it impacting our residents? Like, what are they exactly feeling and experiencing right now? So we had these 3 workshops. A lot of people mentioned, you know, affordable housing and our roads, but they think of community assets differently than we do sometimes, right? Like we might think of are lift stations, but they're talking about Boys and Girls Club locations and churches and the retail stores that are in their neighborhoods. And I think that's important for us to think through as we're planning for overall resiliency. We are very focused right now on the next Resilient Florida grant cycle. By my estimate, I think there are about half of our municipalities have not yet applied for Resilient Florida funding. So that means that they don't have a vulnerability assessment that is compliant with state funding that allows that jurisdiction to then apply for implementation dollars. So we're gonna do what we can to help and see if we can support that technical capacity, or, you know, sometimes it's just reminding people of this opportunity. So the planning grants, right? It's free money. It's 100% grant funded to do these vulnerability assessments. And we hope to see more jurisdictions apply for that. We're going to have our own workshop June 27th from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m., which is staff level anticipated participation. So everyone in Palm Beach County, we hope you know, somebody from your municipal staff level is interested in attending. And we've talked to Dr. Moran as well about attending, and including our drainage district colleagues, so that we can really stress the importance of everyone applying for this funding while it's available. We're also going to look at shoreline protection. And then one thing I'll note too, we're having a Southeast Florida Climate Change Compact workshop sometime in June, July. We haven't yet set that date. One thing we're looking at is how are people addressing housing in these vulnerability assessments? The state guidelines only, I think, call out public housing. So that's, you know, actual subsidized housing. But what are we, you know, who's going above and beyond the scope of work for these vulnerability assessments to make sure that housing is being addressed in a thoughtful way? So that's all I have. I'm trying to be quick. I know everyone's hungry, and I'll turn it over to Paul.
You were excellent, and thank you for rushing through that. At this point in time, I'd like to call on Paul Linton, the Palm Beach County Water Resources Manager. Mr. Linton, you're recognized, sir. Thank you.
All right, I'm live now, okay. Well, I'm gonna fall through my presentation pretty quickly, but I'm gonna take a little time at the end to answer some, or add some information to what the discussion going on, because it seems to be focused on the rainfall side of it. But Paul Linton, Water Resource Manager for Palm Beach County. Just highlighting this slide is to tell you the bottom bullet is that drainage rates in the basins in pretty much lower East Coast range from about ½ inch a day to 2 inches a day. Use the 2 inch a days or stuff that drained in the intercoastal. To put that in perspective, anytime you get behind that, above that 1 inch, you're falling behind. And then when you start losing capacity because the tailwater comes up, it's easier to fall behind. And for perspective, if you're out there in the basin and you get 12 inches of rain and you only have 1 inch of drainage, it takes you 12 days to fully recover. And rarely does the wet season give you 12 days of dry time. So that's the point of the slide. So talking about big rainfall events, this is a picture of the hurricane from Ian. Over on the right-hand side, you can see it's all pretty much red, and this is the maximum rainfall for the last 20 years. Sorry about that. Okay, usually I'm too quiet. But you can see from this graph is there's nowhere to hide. You're going to get the better part of 15 inches of rain somewhere in that 20-year period. Just kind of an interesting statistics. When someone says the return period is 1 in 100 years, that kind of is misleading. If you have a 30-year mortgage, you can expect a 20% chance of getting that storm during your 30-year mortgage. So it's always kind of strange when you say 1 in 1,000. Well, it's going to happen in Florida more than once in that 1,000 years. Zooming in on your guys' lovely day, I'll just say that was painful. I've seen these type of focus cells in my operation days, never quite this big, but no surprise what's coming. This is same graphic, but for a 3-day, which is the design storm for South Florida Water District. is they set the house pads for new developments to be dry up to 100-year 3-day storm, which ballpark figure, that's 12 to 18 inches depending upon where you're in the district. Fair game to be 18 inches pretty much anywhere. With a 20% increase would put you more in the 22-inch range. And that's anything above that, or if you start behind, then you're vulnerable to get that damage. It just takes an inch above the house pad to rack up considerable charges or impacts. Just hitting our highlights, kind of moving on from the storm, we've put an appeal into the FEMA on their storm surge maps. We have concerns over their modeling. They came back and said, we don't agree. We've now requested an independent scientific panel review, and that has yet to be scheduled. Our long-term concerns are both the flooding and water supply. There were 6 major projects in SERP that basically provided offsetting water for the water supply for Palm Beach County and freed up water for the restoration. We kind of sit as Palm Beach County at the north end. The refuge really has no flexibility to add additional storage, so we need those projects to make up for the water supply that gets shifted. And I'm not going to go into that detail. The Lake Okeechobee, the schedule is an improvement over what was previously, but we do have concerns about higher water levels, both from the lake impact and from the L8 basin, which drains Lake Okeechobee. And that, when the lake gets high, the drainage gets impacted pretty quickly in that basin. And then we have to take all that water to tide through these structures, which there's often not capacity for several days, if not a week. And that's kind of the highlights on that. And then just a little more details. You want to read these, you can, but our biggest concern is just the handling water. The water supply was an improvement, but there is some lack of specificity in the intermediate zone, Zone D, and we are concerned that without the proper attention to the water supply aspect as you get lower, that we'll lose some of those benefits that were identified in the new schedule. We are very encouraged by how many projects we have. We have about $75 million of projects identified, and I'll hit some highlights on some that are more active. We got the Lochessie River Restoration Initiative, and we also have the Corps project, the SERP for the Lochessie River Watershed Restoration Project. We got the Lake Worth Initiative. We had the completion of the Corbett Levee upgrade. I'm going to go flipping through that, but basically it's a levee that holds back water from a very large natural area, protects the Indian Trail 40,000 residents. We also have the state who stepped in and funded 2 large storage cells in the LA Basin. That's the C12 and C13 of phase 2 of the C51 reservoir. They total about 14,000 acre feet, and that will come online in about 2026. And that's about a $113 million project. Corbett, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. Corbett area is a very large natural area. I'm showing on this map. It's above the Indian Trail. The green line is the levee that was already completed. The orange line is the levee that remains to be completed, looking to complete that in 2 years and remove that risk from and provide better hydro period flexibility for Corbett. And that is it in a light speed.
Boy, that was truly impressive.
All right. I do have just to really do support the district working on this automation of those gates. I was with Kevin when we had the Hurricane Irma, and both him and I had to open our gates and leave them opened as we watched level rise, because if those gates aren't open and you don't have a resilient structure, the generators burn out, everything burns out, and you won't be operating those gates for a long time, and the gates closed will be worse than the gates open. But trying to explain that to people is a challenge. Protecting now is both good for the sea level rise and for the more immediate possibility of storm surge. And as I got to say, getting $19 million now, you need to get that, because the $3 billion of the projects need to get it on the hopper, because it ain't going to get done quickly.
I'm not optimistic, but it's not $3 billion. $3 billion is just for the pumps and structures. It doesn't include the banks, the berms, the pumps on the tributary canals.
Absolutely.
It's a much bigger project than $3 billion.
And then when you start lowering canals, you have sea level rise, saltwater intrusion starts rearing its head, and now you got well field relocation,
Right, exactly. All right, are there any questions for either, or discussion for either Ms. Houston or Mr. Linton, or any of the Palm Beach issues? Any of the committee members of either the Broward County or Palm Beach water groups? Anyone? Anyone online? I'll get Mayor Weiss next. Is there anybody online?
No, sir.
All right, Mayor Weiss, you're recognized, sir.
I want to thank you all for putting this program together. It is excellent. I think, in understanding our mutual need and support for each other, that we saw what happened with your storm here, how that the economic impact to Palm Beach County, with the loss of Port Everglades being able to deliver fuel, and that hit us within 2 days. 2 days of them not being able to deliver fuel, we started to feel the effects. And so obviously we're going to be very supportive of being able to support you all in your endeavors to make sure that you are resilient here and able to mitigate for your flood needs. I think it's one question I don't expect to be able to be answered today, but a question I will have, or I do have, is in understanding that was a 1 in 1,000 year storm as it was described, but we also know the 1 in 100s come as we saw every year. What would it take to recreate such a level that we feel those impacts again? I don't believe it would take a 1 in 1,000 year storm. I'm sure it's much less. So to have an understanding of what that level is and make sure we protect you all against that.
Okay. I think that's more of a question for our port director. Dr. Hirado, do you know?
Well, my understanding is that much of the disruption was a function of flooding of the fueling pumps, and there's this alternative,
Right.
like this intermittent transfer. And so I believe that when they addressed that issue, they were working to build it back up so that that wouldn't be a recurring issue, so that they're adequately addressing. But we can certainly explore that in terms of the remaining flood exposure and the levels at which that would occur.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to make up numbers, and these are made up, not fictitious numbers. It was 3 feet of higher elevation, and that's normally good enough for most storms, but in this storm, it was 7 feet. Again, these are all fictitious numbers of standing water, and until that standing water went away, that's what was causing the problem. It wasn't the pumping stations. They were still functioning, but they couldn't get the vehicles to them. Okay. Is there, first, public comment. Is there any person present in person or online that wishes to address this joint meeting of the Palm Beach County Water Resources Task Force and the Broward County Water Advisory Board? Is there any person present? Is there any person present? If not, show the public hearing opened and closed. And is there any additional comment by any member on any topic, present or online? Is there any additional comment? I see no additional comment for any member
I have a
present.
brief comment.
Commissioner
I just want to
Bergeron.
thank Palm Beach County for their leadership in Broward County. And as a board member, we hear you, and we basically, your leadership on these issues are extremely important. And just a brief, I was here in 1947. I kind of hate to say that because I'm telling my age, but seeing my grandfather pick people off their rooftops in an airboat, going to the water plant down 441 in an airboat. So we've come a long way since those days. And I will say that the main thing here is that we have to be able to address global warming, sea rise, and be able to maintain 100-year events, 25-year events. I'm not sure we'll ever have a design for a 1,000-year event. That's an act of God that would be very difficult for all of us. But we hear you, and I'm really want to thank all of you, because it's all about we together, having the leadership ahead of time too, Mr. Sherman. And so thank you very much, and I'm honored to be a part of this team.
Thank you, sir. Was there anyone, I see no one commenting in person, was there anyone online? If not, there's no other business to come before us. I apologize for those people who attend our meetings. I know I normally get us out promptly on time, but this was a big one. I hereby announce this meeting is adjourned. And